They say some memories never leave you, but what if they follow you? What if the sound of your childhood, the gentle rhythm of 3 slow knocks, finds its way back, even after the house where it all began has long turned to ash? Tonight's story isn't just about a haunting. It's about echoes that travel across time and space, about something that refuses to stay buried, even after flames consumed every last brick. A woman hundreds of miles from the ruins of her childhood home begins hearing the same familiar knocking in the dead of night. At first it's faint, harmless, but soon the knocks grow louder, closer, until they're no longer just at the door. As the past claws its way into the present, one chilling question lingers: how do you escape a home that no longer exists? Stay with me as we unravel the terrifying mystery of the knocking echoes from my childhood home, 200 miles away. It began the way most things like this do, not with a scream or a shadow, but with a sound so subtle it could have been dismissed. 3 slow knocks against the hollow wood of her apartment door at precisely 2:13 a.m. The sound carried through the stillness like a pebble breaking the surface of a black lake, ripples of unease spreading outward until she sat upright in bed. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she strained to hear more. Silence answered. No footsteps, no voices, just that pattern lingering in her mind. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. It was so familiar it hurt, pulling her back through years she'd spent trying to forget. She told herself it was a neighbor, a dream, the settling of an old building. But deep down, beneath reason and logic, she recognized the rhythm. She hadn't heard it since childhood, in a house 200 miles away that no longer existed. That house had burned to the ground over a decade ago, yet somehow its ghost seemed to be reaching across time and space. She whispered, "Who's there?" into the dark, her voice trembling like the flame of a dying candle. The knocking didn't come again that night, but sleep never did either. She lay awake until dawn, every creak of the building sharpening her nerves like a blade. Memories began to crawl back, unbidden and unwanted. Her father's gentle signal outside her bedroom door late at night. 3 soft knocks, a pause, 3 more. His way of checking in, of saying, "I'm here," without waking her younger brother across the hall. But he was gone now, taken by the same fire that reduced their home to ash. She could still smell it sometimes in her dreams, the acrid mix of smoke and charred wood, could still see the orange glow swallowing her world as she stood barefoot in the grass outside. They said the fire was electrical. They said it was quick, but no one could explain why she still heard her father's knocks at night, even in her dreams. She stared at the ceiling until sunrise painted cracks of light on the walls. When her alarm buzzed at 7 o'clock, she felt like she hadn't left the edge of that burning house in years. The next day passed in a fog. At work she nodded through meetings she couldn't recall and stared blankly at her computer screen as the hours bled together. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress from the recent move to the city. A new apartment, a new job, a new life, or at least that had been the plan. But when the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of old bruises, a familiar dread began pooling in her stomach. By the time she returned to her apartment, the quiet was no longer comforting. It felt heavy, as though the air itself was holding its breath. She double-checked the locks before bed and left the hallway light on, a small rebellion against the darkness that seemed to be waiting for her. As she slipped beneath the covers, she kept her phone in her hand, thumb hovering over 911. It was ridiculous, she told herself. Just a sound, just old pipes or neighbors, nothing more. But when the clock blinked 2:13 a.m. in its cold green glow, The knocks returned. 3 deliberate raps. A pause. 3 more. She sat up so fast her phone clattered to the floor. The sound was clearer this time, closer somehow, as though the door between her and it was thinner now. Her throat tightened. "Who's there?" she called out again, her voice cracking under its own weight. No answer came. Only silence so complete it pressed against her eardrums. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and sat frozen, every muscle coiled tight. When the knocks came again, she swore they weren't from the door anymore. They were from inside the apartment walls, traveling from one corner to another like something pacing unseen. She pressed her hands to her ears. It didn't help. The sound reverberated in her skull, each knock hitting her like a hammer against bone. Panic clawed up her throat. She wasn't imagining it. She couldn't be. The rhythm was too perfect, too deliberate. The knocks stopped as suddenly as they started. She sat there for what felt like hours, heart pounding so hard it hurt. When she finally found the courage to move, she tiptoed to the door and pressed her eye to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. No shadows, no movement, just stillness. She backed away and slumped against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. Tears blurred her vision as memories flooded in. The house, the fire, her father's hand on the doorframe, tapping out the same rhythm. She'd been 8 years old the last time she heard it before everything went up in flames. She'd never told anyone, but sometimes she thought she still heard it faintly in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep. But now it wasn't faint. It wasn't a dream. It was here, in this apartment, 200 miles away from where it should have died with the house. She curled tighter into herself and rocked gently, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real." But even as she said it, she knew it was. When dawn finally broke, she felt brittle, like a porcelain figure one tap away from shattering. She called in sick to work and spent the day wandering her apartment in a daze, flinching at every sound. The knocks didn't come during the day. They never did, but she felt their absence like a predator lurking just out of sight, waiting for nightfall to pounce. When evening came, she considered checking into a hotel, fleeing the apartment entirely. But something, curiosity, fear, a strange pull she couldn't name, kept her rooted. She told herself she needed to face it, needed to know, so she made preparations. She left every light on, turned the TV to a low murmur, and kept her phone charged in her hand. But as the hours ticked closer to 2:13, a familiar dread coiled in her gut. She knew it would come again, and this time she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what came after. The clock glowed 2:11 a.m. She sat upright in bed, wide awake, watching the minutes crawl closer. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, her body heavy with exhaustion. But she couldn't make herself lie down. She clutched her phone so tightly, her knuckles ached. The night air felt different tonight, thicker somehow, as though the walls of the apartment were holding in a breath that wasn't hers. She tried to rationalize again. Old buildings creak, neighbors come home late, but nothing explained the precision of the knocks. 3, pause, 3 more. It wasn't random, it was a message, and deep down, she already knew who it was from. She didn't want to admit it, not even to herself, but she felt it. The same way she used to feel him standing in the hallway, outside her childhood bedroom. The same warmth, the same weight. But now it wasn't warmth. It wasn't comfort. It was cold, heavy, suffocating. At 2:13, it began again. 3 slow knocks. A pause. 3 more. This time she didn't flinch. She didn't even breathe. Her heart thundered so loudly. She thought the knocking might drown in its rhythm. But no, it was clear, louder than before. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside her bedroom wall, just above her headboard. Her eyes darted upward. The plaster was smooth and unbroken, but she swore she saw the faintest vibration, like something tapping from the other side. She pressed her hand flat against it. The surface was cool, still, but she felt it, a subtle thump beneath her palm. 3. Pause. 3 more. Her phone buzzed in her lap. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. No caller ID. Her stomach dropped as she stared at it. It rang 3 times. Stopped. Then started again. She let it go to voicemail, hands trembling so badly, she almost dropped the phone. A notification popped up. 1 new voicemail. Her finger hovered over it. She didn't want to listen. Every part of her screamed not to, but some darker, quieter part of her, the part that had been waiting for this, pressed play. Static crackled in her ear, followed by a hollow echo. Then knock, 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 knock. She dropped the phone as though it burned her. The sound continued from the walls, in perfect unison with the recording. She clapped her hands over her ears and squeezed her eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't real. It's a dream. But then a voice came through the static, soft and cracking like wood in a fire. Why did you leave me? Her eyes flew open. The knocks stopped. The apartment plunged into silence, so dense it pressed against her chest. Her hands shook as she fumbled to turn on every light, every TV, every device with sound, anything to fill the quiet. But even as the noise surrounded her, the memory of that voice lingered, hollow and impossibly close. She hadn't heard it in 12 years, not since the night her house burned and took everything with it. Not since the night she ran barefoot into the yard, while her father never made it out. She stayed awake until sunlight pooled in golden streaks across the floor, her body trembling with the effort of staying upright. Her phone screen still glowed with the missed call notification. She wanted to delete it, pretend it never happened, but her finger hovered and hesitated. A part of her needed to know if it would call again. By the time evening fell, she felt like a ghost in her own skin. Her co-workers' concerned texts went unanswered. She barely ate, barely moved, just sat curled on the couch, staring at the clock, as though her eyes could hold back the inevitable. But deep down, she knew the knocks would return. They always did. At 2:13 a.m., they came again. Louder this time, not from the walls, but from beneath the floorboards. 3 sharp strikes. A pause. 3 more. She leapt to her feet, heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. The knocks traveled across the room, floor to wall, wall to ceiling, ceiling to door, as though whatever made them was circling her. Her phone vibrated. No caller ID. She didn't answer. The voicemail played on its own. Knock, 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 pause, knock, 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 knock. Then the voice again. You forgot me. She didn't sleep the next night. She couldn't. Every sound, every groan of the apartment building felt like a precursor to the inevitable. The knocks were coming. She could feel it in the way the air seemed thicker after sundown, in the way the light bulbs flickered faintly as though straining against something unseen. She sat on the floor with her back pressed to the wall, knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her phone lay beside her. No missed calls yet, no voicemails, but she knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. At 2:13 her fear crystallized into certainty as the first knock came, not soft this time, not tentative. It was loud enough to rattle the frames on her walls. 3 sharp strikes. Pause. 3 more. Her breath hitched. She clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. The sound seemed to roll through the room like distant thunder, echoing in places sound shouldn't reach. It wasn't just at the door anymore. It was in the walls, under the floorboards. Inside her head, the phone buzzed violently. No caller ID again. She didn't touch it. This time, it answered itself. The speaker crackled with static, then cleared just enough for her to hear breathing on the other end. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Then, knock, knock, pause, knock, knock, and a voice closer than before, low and rasping. "Why won't you let me in?" She slammed the phone face down on the floor, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold them still. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop it, stop it, please." The knocking grew louder, more insistent, like fists pounding from all sides. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside her skull, rattling her teeth, vibrating in her bones. She squeezed her eyes shut and rocked back and forth, whispering nonsense to drown it out. But the voice cut through everything like a blade. "You left me there, in the dark. You left me to burn." Her eyes snapped open. "No," she gasped, her voice cracking. "I didn't. I tried. I couldn't. I couldn't." But the words died on her tongue. Somewhere deep down, a part of her believed it. Believed she should have gone back, that maybe she could have pulled him out, saved him, but she hadn't. She'd run barefoot across the grass, as the windows shattered behind her, as the flames swallowed everything she knew. The knocking stopped all at once. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing against her eardrums, until she almost wished it would return. Then her phone vibrated again. Another voicemail, against every instinct screaming for her to destroy the phone. She played it. This time, no knock, no static, only the faint sound of breathing. "Then, I found you." The words were no louder than a whisper, but they reverberated through her body like a scream. She stared at the phone until the screen went black, her reflection staring back with wide, unblinking eyes. When morning finally came, she stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. The woman staring back in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, trembling. She tried to tell herself she was losing her mind, that grief and exhaustion had finally caught up to her. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt it, a truth she couldn't unsee. Whatever she'd left behind in that house had never truly stayed there. It had followed her, it had waited, and now it wanted her back. She didn't sleep the next night. She couldn't. Every sound, every groan of the apartment building felt like a precursor to the inevitable. The knocks were coming. She could feel it in the way the air seemed thicker after sundown, in the way the light bulbs flickered faintly as though straining against something unseen. She sat on the floor with her back pressed to the wall, knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her phone lay beside her. No missed calls yet, no voicemails, but she knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. At 2:13 her fear crystallized into certainty as the first knock came, not soft this time, not tentative. It was loud enough to rattle the frames on her walls. 3 sharp strikes. Pause. 3 more. Her breath hitched. She clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. The sound seemed to roll through the room like distant thunder, echoing in places sound shouldn't reach. It wasn't just at the door anymore, it was in the walls, under the floorboards. Inside her head, the phone buzzed violently. No caller ID again. She didn't touch it. This time, it answered itself. The speaker crackled with static, then cleared just enough for her to hear breathing on the other end. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Then, knock, knock, pause, knock, knock, and a voice closer than before, low and rasping. "Why won't you let me in?" She slammed the phone face down on the floor, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold them still. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop it, stop it, please." The knocking grew louder, more insistent, like fists pounding from all sides. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside her skull, rattling her teeth, vibrating in her bones. She squeezed her eyes shut and rocked back and forth, whispering nonsense to drown it out. But the voice cut through everything like a blade. "You left me there, in the dark. You left me to burn." Her eyes snapped open. "No," she gasped, her voice cracking. "I didn't. I tried. I couldn't. I couldn't." But the words died on her tongue. Somewhere deep down, a part of her believed it. Believed she should have gone back, that maybe she could have pulled him out, saved him, but she hadn't. She'd run barefoot across the grass, as the windows shattered behind her, as the flames swallowed everything she knew. The knocking stopped all at once. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing against her eardrums, until she almost wished it would return. Then her phone vibrated again. Another voicemail, against every instinct screaming for her to destroy the phone. She played it. This time, no knock, no static, only the faint sound of breathing. "Then, I found you." The words were no louder than a whisper, but they reverberated through her body like a scream. She stared at the phone until the screen went black, her reflection staring back with wide, unblinking eyes. When morning finally came, she stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. The woman staring back in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, trembling. She tried to tell herself she was losing her mind, that grief and exhaustion had finally caught up to her. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt it, a truth she couldn't unsee. Whatever she'd left behind in that house had never truly stayed there. It had followed her, it had waited, and now it wanted her back. She didn't sleep, not even for a moment. She sat on the floor with her back against the couch, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the glowing digits of the clock. Every light in the apartment blazed as if illumination could keep the darkness at bay, but the shadows clung stubbornly to the corners, too thick to disperse. She held her phone tightly in both hands, the screen unlocked, ready to dial emergency services. But what would she say? That a sound had followed her across miles and years, from a house that no longer existed. That her dead father's knock now echoed through her apartment walls, like a memory given weight and voice. No, there were no words that could make this sound sane. As the minutes crawled closer to 2:13, her thoughts twisted themselves into knots. She couldn't leave. The thought of stepping into the hallway made her stomach lurch. She couldn't call anyone. She didn't even know what to ask for. All she could do was wait for the inevitable and hope that when it came, she'd have the strength not to answer. But some part of her, the small, aching part that had missed him all these years, wanted to open the door. Just once, just to see. At exactly 2:13, the air in the apartment seemed to collapse in on itself, thickening until it felt like she was breathing smoke. Then came the first knock, Loud, so loud the picture frames on the wall rattled in protest. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 more. The sound reverberated through the apartment, as though it wasn't confined to the door anymore, but spilling from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. The knocks repeated, each one more urgent than the last. The rhythm was perfect, deliberate. It wasn't random noise, it was a message, a demand. Her phone vibrated violently in her lap, the screen flashing an all-too-familiar message. No caller ID. Her fingers trembled so hard, she nearly dropped it, but she didn't answer. She wouldn't give it that satisfaction, yet the voicemail began to play anyway, the speaker crackling with static that faded to the sound of deep, ragged breathing. Then came the knocking again, this time from inside the recording. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. The voice followed, quieter now but somehow closer, as though it was speaking directly into her ear. You came back. Now, let me in. The words froze her blood. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her body felt rooted to the floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out everything except the sound of the door handle rattling faintly, like unseen fingers testing it. The knocking grew louder, heavier, as though fists were slamming into the wood. Dust rained down from the doorframe. She pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head violently. No, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, no, you're not real. You're not real. But even as she said it, a part of her doubted. A part of her remembered the warmth of those knocks in childhood, the comfort of knowing he was just outside her door, keeping her safe. That part of her whispered back, what if it is him? What if he never left? But this wasn't comfort. This wasn't safety. This was something else entirely, something patient and angry and impossibly persistent. Her phone vibrated again, nearly slipping from her hands this time. Another voicemail notification lit the screen, but instead of no caller ID, the display showed a single word in all caps, home. Her heart skipped a beat, against every instinct screaming at her to delete it, to throw the phone across the room. Her thumb hovered over the play button and pressed. The message began with silence. No static, no breathing, just emptiness. Then a voice so low and raw, it seemed to rise from beneath her floorboards. Open the door. The pause that followed was longer this time, long enough that she thought it was over, that maybe it had retreated. But then the voice came again, colder and sharper. Or I will. Before she could even react, the knocking ceased. The sudden silence was heavier than the noise had been, pressing into her ears until she could hear her own heartbeat. Then the sound of metal turning made her stomach plummet. The deadbolt clicked, slowly and deliberately. She hadn't touched it. She hadn't moved. Yet the door creaked open, just wide enough for a sliver of darkness to spill into the room. She pressed her back hard against the couch, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Please, she whispered. Please don't. But even as she said it, a shape began to form in the threshold, tall, indistinct, flickering like a shadow caught in firelight. It didn't move forward, not yet, but the air grew heavier, hotter, carrying that same acrid scent of burning wood. Her chest tightened painfully. She could feel it watching her from the doorway, waiting. The voice came one final time, louder now, as though it was no longer confined to her phone, but spilling from the very walls around her. You left me, but I never left you. Her tears blurred the edges of the world as she shook her head violently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The door creaked further open. She couldn't look, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The weight of 12 years of guilt crushed her from all sides. And then, silence. The shape in the doorway seemed to dissolve, the heat in the air dissipating like smoke caught in a breeze. The door slammed shut with a deafening crack, the force rattling the entire apartment. She sat frozen, gasping for air, every muscle trembling from adrenaline. For a long time, nothing happened. No knocks, no voice, just silence. She dared not move, dared not speak. Eventually, the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains. The apartment felt empty again, almost normal. But she knew better. She knew it wasn't over. Whatever had found her wasn't finished. It was only waiting for the next night, the next 2:13 a.m., the next knock. The sun rose as if nothing had happened, its soft light spilling over her apartment floor like a cruel reminder that the world was still turning. She hadn't moved from her spot against the couch. Her back ached, her legs were stiff, and her hands trembled so badly she had to press them hard into her knees to still them. She couldn't remember closing her eyes, but now they felt gritty and raw as though she'd spent hours crying. Maybe she had. The memory of the door cracking open lingered in her mind like an afterimage burned into her retinas. She could still hear the voice echoing in her skull. "You left me, but I never left you." Every time she replayed the words, the tone seemed different, sometimes grief-stricken, sometimes furious, sometimes so hollow it felt inhuman. She had to get out. That was her first coherent thought as the sunlight crept higher. She had to leave the apartment, leave the city if she could. But even as the thought formed, she felt the weight of it pressing her down, a suffocating certainty that no amount of distance would matter. Whatever this was, it wasn't tied to the apartment. It was tied to her. She stumbled to her feet on stiff legs, every sound amplified, the creak of the floorboards beneath her, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft thud of her phone falling from her lap. She stared at it lying screen up on the floor, the blank display reflecting her wide, bloodshot eyes. She didn't want to touch it, didn't want to see another notification, another voicemail, another word from the thing that haunted her, but she couldn't leave it there either. Gathering every ounce of courage she had, she snatched it up and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The screen remained black. Relief washed over her in a wave so strong she nearly wept. Maybe it was over. Maybe the phone dying had broken the connection. Maybe finally she could breathe. But the relief was short-lived. As she turned to head toward the bathroom, she heard it, faint, insistent. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. The sound came not from the door this time, but from her bedroom. Her stomach turned violently as she froze in place, listening. It came again, louder now, the rhythm painfully familiar. 3 deliberate strikes against her closet door, as though something waited just beyond it. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks repeated a 3rd time, shaking the thin wooden door on its hinges, then silence. Her ears rang with the effort of listening for what came next, but nothing did. Minutes passed. She didn't know how many. Slowly, shakily, she backed away from the bedroom and grabbed her car keys from the kitchen counter. She didn't care about packing, didn't care about locking up. She needed to put distance between herself and whatever was waiting in that closet. But as her hand closed over the doorknob, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It shouldn't have. The battery was dead. Her pulse spiked as she yanked it out. the screen glowing bright, despite the cracked charge icon. One new voicemail. No caller ID. Her thumb hovered over it. She didn't want to listen, but some dark part of her, some desperate, terrified piece that couldn't look away, pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then the sound of breathing, shallow, labored, followed by the faint crackle of burning wood. And finally, a voice that made her knees buckle. "You're coming home." The message ended with 3 slow knocks and a pause. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as she clutched the phone to her chest. She couldn't do this anymore. She had to know what was happening. And she knew, with a heavy certainty, there was only one place she could get answers. The drive back to her hometown was long and merciless. The July sun beat down on the asphalt, but she felt cold in her bones, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Mile after mile unspooled beneath her tires, her thoughts looping endlessly. 12 years. It had been 12 years since the fire that gutted her childhood home and left only ashes and memories. They said it was faulty wiring, that it happened so fast. No one could have done anything. She had believed them for a while, but the older she got, the less certain she became. Strange details clawed at the back of her mind. How her father's voice had sounded wrong that night. How the knocking on her bedroom door had come louder, more frantic than usual. She had buried those memories deep, but now they surfaced unbidden, clamoring for attention. As the miles ticked by, her phone remained dark in the passenger seat. She didn't dare turn it off. Somehow, she knew the messages weren't done. By the time she reached the outskirts of her old neighborhood, dusk had fallen, casting the streets in long orange shadows. The house, or what was left of it, sat at the end of a narrow cul-de-sac. The lot had long since overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, nature reclaiming what fire had taken. The mailbox leaned precariously, its rusted door hanging open like a gaping mouth. She pulled to a stop at the curb and killed the engine. For a long moment, she couldn't bring herself to move. Her childhood home was gone, reduced to a foundation of cracked cement and blackened timbers. But as she stared, a chill swept through her. The outline of the house was still there in her mind. Walls, windows, doors, all superimposed over the ruin, like a phantom refusing to fade. She stepped out of the car slowly, her shoes crunching against the gravel. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though she knew that was impossible. As she crossed the cracked sidewalk and stepped onto the lot, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She flinched so hard, she nearly dropped it. The screen lit up with another voicemail. No caller ID. Hands trembling, she brought it to her ear. Static filled the line, followed by the faint echo of footsteps on wood. Then the voice, no longer whispering but low and commanding. "You're standing on my bones." The message ended with 3 slow knocks. She stood frozen on the cracked concrete foundation, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through her ribs. The ruins of her childhood home stretched before her, overgrown with tall grass and littered with blackened wood that hadn't been touched in years. Yet in her mind's eye, she saw the house as it had been, white siding, blue shutters, the front porch where her father would sit on summer evenings. The memory was so vivid, it made her chest ache, but it was the words from the voicemail that echoed louder in her skull. "You're standing on my bones." She tried to convince herself it was metaphor, just the voice playing games with her fear. But the ground beneath her feet suddenly felt unstable, as though it might open up and swallow her whole. She wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and run. But another part of her, the part that had driven her back here after all these years, kept her rooted in place. If she left now, she knew the knocking would never stop. It would follow her to every city, every apartment, every sleepless night. Whatever this was, it wouldn't let her go. Not until she understood. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Another voicemail. She didn't want to listen, but her trembling hand was already lifting the device to her ear. This time, the static was thicker, more oppressive, and through it she heard faint whispers overlapping in a tangled chorus. Words she couldn't make out. Then, as if 100 voices fell silent at once, one single voice broke through, deep, familiar, and heavy with accusation. "You locked me in." The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, a step, her heel catching on a cracked tile. She remembered that night. The heat, the smoke, the way the hallway had seemed endless as she ran barefoot toward the front door. Had she locked it? She couldn't remember. She didn't think so, but memory was a slippery thing, and the voice sounded so sure, so certain. The static rose again, swallowing the line before she could respond. She pulled the phone away and stared at the screen. It had gone black, the battery dead once more, but somehow she knew another message would come. It always did. The air around her thickened, tinged with the faint scent of charred wood. The setting sun had dipped below the horizon, and the shadows creeping across the lot seemed almost alive, stretching in unnatural directions. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to steady her breathing. "I didn't lock you in," she whispered aloud, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "I didn't," but the words felt hollow, lost to the whispering wind that curled through the ruins like unseen fingers. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint creak of wood. Impossible, since there were no standing walls left to make such a sound. Her gaze darted to the outline of where her bedroom used to be. She could still picture it perfectly, the pale pink wallpaper, the small bed under the window, the closet door she always kept open because she feared what might knock from the inside. 3 knocks echoed across the lot, clear, slow, deliberate. She spun around, eyes wide, but there was no one there. The sound came again, this time from behind her, closer now. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Her breath caught in her throat. The knocks didn't come from wood or metal. They sounded like fists striking earth, as if something below the foundation was trying to get out. She backed away slowly, her legs trembling. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." The ground beneath her vibrated faintly, and a crack split through the concrete near her feet, with a sharp, splintering sound. She stumbled backward, her phone slipping from her hands and landing face down on the dirt. As she bent to retrieve it, the screen lit up on its own. One new voicemail. She didn't press play. This time, the message played without her touch. "I'm still here." The voice was louder now, no longer muffled by static. It was coming from her phone, but it was also coming from beneath her feet, vibrating through the cracked foundation into her bones. "You left me in the dark," it said. "You walked away while I screamed." The knocks came again, this time so violent. The ground shook beneath her, sending up puffs of dust and ash. She dropped to her knees, clutching the phone so tightly her fingers ached. "I didn't hear you," she cried. "I thought you were behind me. I swear I thought." But the words died in her throat, as a low, guttural sound rose from beneath the earth. It wasn't a voice this time. It was a laugh, slow and rasping, edged with a bitterness that made her stomach twist. The cracks in the concrete spread like a spider web, and the air filled with the stench of burning wood and hair. Her vision blurred as tears stung her eyes, but she forced herself to her feet and staggered toward the car. The laughter followed her, rising into a chorus of whispers that grew louder with each step. "You left, you burned, you locked me in." The words overlapped, dozens of voices, some sounding like her father, others strange and unfamiliar. She fumbled with her car keys, her fingers slick with sweat, and yanked open the door. The engine roared to life as she slammed it into gear and sped away from the lot. She didn't look back. She couldn't, but even as the distance grew, the whispers clung to her like smoke in her lungs. The drive back into town was a blur. She didn't remember the stoplights, the streets, or the worried glances of pedestrians as she flew past. All she could hear was the rhythmic knocking in her head. 3 strikes, pause, 3 more. Her phone, now silent in the passenger seat, sat dark, as though nothing had happened. But she knew better. She could feel it watching her from somewhere deep within the black glass screen, watching and waiting. She didn't stop driving until the lights of the town faded in her rear-view mirror, and the road became nothing but a narrow strip of asphalt cutting through fields of swaying grass. Her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white and stiff, but she didn't dare loosen her hold. Even now she could hear it, the faint echo of knocking, so soft it was almost a suggestion, hidden beneath the hum of her tires against the road. She turned up the radio, desperate to drown it out, but the static that hissed through the speakers only made her stomach churn. The voice wasn't speaking this time. It didn't need to. The rhythm of 3 knocks, a pause, and 3 more had embedded itself into her very bones. She tapped her finger against the wheel unconsciously in time, with it realizing only when her nails bit into her palm that she was mimicking the sound. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, yanking her hand away as though burned. But the knocking continued. Now in her head, steady and patient like a heartbeat she couldn't quiet. She pulled off the road at the first gas station she saw, the neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. The lot was empty, and the overhead lights cast sickly pools of yellow that barely reached the edges of the cracked pavement. She killed the engine and sat in silence, gripping her phone tightly. It had been dark since she left the lot where her house once stood, but she couldn't shake the feeling that any second now it would light up again with another message. She pressed the power button, half expecting it to spark to life on its own. Nothing happened. Relief battled with unease in her chest. What if it had gone quiet because she'd fled? What if silence was worse? The thought turned her stomach, and she leaned her head against the steering wheel, willing her breath to steady. She needed answers, real ones, not whispers, not knocks. She needed to know if she was losing her mind, or if something had truly followed her across years and miles. Her mind turned to the old neighbor, Mrs. Kellen. She had lived across the street from her childhood home, the kind of woman who saw everything without ever being seen herself. If anyone remembered the fire, if anyone knew the truth about that night, it would be her. Maybe she could shed light on this madness, give it form, or else disprove it entirely. The thought gave her just enough resolve to start the car again. The gas station lights faded in the rear-view mirror as she turned back toward town. But as the tires hummed against the road, a sound joined the white noise, 3 soft taps, faint but distinct, from somewhere in the car. Her eyes darted to the rear-view mirror. Nothing but the empty back seat. She gripped the wheel tighter, her breath quickening. Then came 3 more taps, louder now, and undeniably from within the trunk. Her mouth went dry. She forced herself to keep driving, her eyes locked on the road ahead. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the pounding of her heart in her ears. She tried to convince herself it was the road, debris bouncing beneath the car, but deep down, she knew better. Whatever had found her wasn't confined to a house, or a phone, or even the earth beneath her feet. It was here, in the car, breathing in the same air. Watching, when she finally turned onto Mrs. Kellen's street, her muscles were so tight, she felt she might snap in half. The houses were lined up neatly as she remembered, though time had weathered their paint and wilted their gardens. She pulled to a stop across from the familiar white house with the blue shutters and stared at it for a long time, willing herself to move. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow that felt like a small mercy in the suffocating darkness. She climbed out of the car and forced her legs to carry her across the street. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the shadows were trying to pull her back. She raised her hand to knock but hesitated, the sound of her knuckles against the wood too close to that rhythm. 3, pause, 3. Instead, she pressed the doorbell, the soft chime echoing faintly inside. Footsteps approached. The door creaked open to reveal Mrs. Kellen, older now, her hair silver and her eyes sharp as ever. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by a shadow of something unreadable. "It's you," she said softly, as if she'd been expecting this. "You've come back." The words sent a chill down her spine. "I need to ask you about the fire," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. Mrs. Kellen studied her for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in, we need to talk." The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment the only sound was the soft hum of an old refrigerator somewhere deeper in the house. Mrs. Kellen led her to a small sitting room, the air heavy with the faint scent of lavender and something older, something damp like earth after rain. She sat stiffly on the edge of a floral armchair, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Across from her, Mrs. Kellen lowered herself into a creaking rocker, her sharp eyes never leaving hers. "You've felt it, haven't you?" the older woman said finally. "The knocking, the calls, the dreams." The words struck her like a slap, so precise, they stripped her of any pretense. "Yes," she whispered, her throat dry. "It started last week, but it feels like it never stopped." Mrs. Kellen nodded, her expression grim. "It wouldn't, not for you, not after that night." She leaned forward, hands folded over her cane. "I saw it happen, child. You weren't the only one screaming." The words hung between them like smoke. She wanted to ask what she meant, but her voice wouldn't come. Mrs. Kellen sighed heavily and glanced toward the window, her eyes distant. "Your father was at the window. I saw him pounding on the glass, but there was no sound. The flames moved strange that night. Not like fire should. They were too fast, too deliberate, like fingers reaching for him." Her hands trembled as she lifted a teacup to her lips, but she didn't drink. "I think he was already gone before the fire took him." The younger woman's stomach turned violently. "Gone," she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, gone?" Mrs. Kellen's gaze snapped back to her, sharp and pitying all at once. "There are things in old houses, things that watch, things that wait. I think your father let one in. She shook her head violently. No, that's not. He wasn't. But even as the words left her lips, the memory clawed its way forward. Her father's strange behavior in the weeks before the fire, the way he'd whispered to the walls late at night when he thought she couldn't hear. She had dismissed it as stress, exhaustion from long hours at work. But now, in this dim room with shadows gathering in the corners, she wasn't so sure. Mrs. Kellen reached for her hand, her fingers cold and brittle like twigs. Child, it doesn't want the house. It wants you. It always did. The tears came then, hot and unbidden. I didn't mean to leave him, she choked out. I didn't know he wasn't behind me. Mrs. Kellen's grip tightened. It's not him anymore. The words settled heavy in her chest, heavier than the smoke that night, heavier than the years of guilt she had carried. She tried to pull her hand away, but Mrs. Kellen held fast. You can't run from this, she said softly. It will follow. It will knock. It will call. And if you answer, her voice trailed off, but the implication was louder than words. Then what do I do? She asked, desperation bleeding into her tone. How do I stop it? Mrs. Kellen finally let her go, sinking back into her chair. You'll have to go back, not just to the house, back to where it began, before the fire, before the knocking. Her stomach lurched. What does that mean? The old woman's eyes gleamed in the dim light. You already know. You've known since you were a child. Oh, her phone buzzed violently in her pocket, startling her so badly she nearly screamed. She fumbled it out, the screen glowing with a single word in bold, pulsing letters. She didn't want to answer. Every cell in her body screamed not to, but her thumb moved on its own, pressing play. This time, there was no static, no breathing, no delay. Just the voice, deep and hollow, filling the room as though it spoke from the walls themselves. I'm waiting. The teacup shattered as Mrs. Kellen's hand spasmed violently, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. You need to leave, she said, her voice tight with fear. Now it knows you're here. The knocking began again, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent. 3 strikes, pause, 3 more. The sound came from everywhere, the front door, the walls, even the ceiling above their heads. Go, Mrs. Kellen shouted, her voice rising over the pounding. Before it finds a way in. She stumbled to her feet, clutching her phone, as though it might anchor her to reality, and ran for the door. The knocking followed her, each blow shaking the old house's frame. As she wrenched the door open, a gust of hot air slammed into her face, thick with the stench of burning wood. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She sprinted to her car, fumbled with the keys, and threw herself behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, just as the front door of Mrs. Kellen's house slammed shut behind her, with a sound like a final verdict. She drove blind, the road blurring beneath her, as tears streamed down her face. The knocking was in her head now, louder than ever. 3, pause, 3. It was no longer asking for permission. It was demanding. And in the stillness between each pounding wave of sound, she heard the voice, closer than ever, whispering through her own frantic breaths. Come home. She didn't remember how she made it back to her apartment. The drive felt fractured, like pieces of a dream stitched together with gaps where time should have been. One moment she was gripping the wheel so hard her hands ached. The next she was fumbling with her keys at her apartment door, her breath ragged and uneven. Every step inside felt wrong. The place didn't feel safe anymore. It didn't even feel like hers. The air was thick, heavy with the faint scent of smoke that clung stubbornly to her hair and clothes, no matter how many times she tried to brush it away. She locked the door behind her, throwing the bolt and sliding the chain into place, though a deep part of her knew it wouldn't matter. If it wanted in, a lock wouldn't stop it. She set her phone on the counter and backed away from it like it was a live wire. But her eyes kept drifting back. The screen was dark, but she could feel it there, humming with unsent messages, with words it hadn't spoken yet. She pressed her hands to her face and let out a shaky sob. She was exhausted, fractured. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The first knock came as she was pacing the living room, soft, tentative, from the far wall near the kitchen. She froze. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. Her breath hitched as her heart slammed against her ribs. She glanced toward the door. No one there, but the sound came again, louder this time, from the opposite wall. Her pulse quickened. The knocks weren't moving around the outside of the apartment. They were traveling through the walls, circling her like a predator testing its prey. She backed into the center of the room, every muscle in her body coiled tight. "Please stop," she whispered, though her voice cracked and wavered. "You don't have to do this." Silence answered her, stretching on so long she almost believed it was over. Then her phone lit up on the counter, the glow cutting through the dim apartment like a blade. One new voicemail. No caller ID. She didn't move. Couldn't, but the message began to play on its own. At first there was nothing, no static, no breathing. Then the voice came, soft but full of an unbearable weight. "You're not listening. You never listen. That's why I burn." The words twisted her stomach into knots. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the voice didn't stop. "I'm in the walls. I'm under your floor. I'm in the space between your heartbeats." She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head violently. "You're not real," she screamed, her voice hoarse. But even as the words left her lips, the knocking resumed, deafening now, pounding from every wall at once. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head. "What do you want from me?" she cried. The voice whispered back through the voicemail speaker, closer than ever, almost tender. "I want you to remember." Her mind flashed back to the night of the fire, running barefoot down the hall, smoke choking her lungs. The sound of fists pounding the door behind her, her father's muffled voice, screaming something she couldn't make out. She had been so sure he was following her, but had he been, or had he been trapped, pounding for help she never gave? The memory shifted, blurred, replaying in her mind with agonizing clarity. His voice, lower, rougher, whispering her name like a warning. And the knock. 3. Pause. 3. Not from the door, from inside the walls. She gasped, clutching her stomach as nausea threatened to double her over. What had she missed? What had she left behind? The knocks stopped as suddenly as they had begun. Silence settled over the apartment, heavy and suffocating. Her phone screen went black. The message ended. She sat on the floor for what felt like hours, listening to the ringing in her ears. Finally, she forced herself to her feet and stumbled toward the bathroom. The face in the mirror barely resembled her, pale, eyes bloodshot, hair damp with sweat. She gripped the edge of the sink to steady herself, her knuckles white. She couldn't keep running. "Mrs. Kellen's words came back to her. "You'll have to go back. Not just to the house, back to where it began." But where had it begun? Before the fire, before the house. The thought made her stomach clench with dread. Her phone vibrated again on the counter. She didn't need to look. She knew what it would say. Another voicemail. Another whisper in the dark. This time she let it play without hesitation. "Come downstairs." The words sent ice down her spine. She lived alone. There was no downstairs. But as she stared at the floor, she swore she saw a faint flicker of orange light, seeping through the cracks in the wood, like firelight from a room she didn't remember existing. She stared at the floor for what felt like hours, her body locked in place by fear. The faint orange glow pulsed from the cracks between the wooden boards like embers breathing in the dark. It didn't make sense. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no downstairs. And yet, every instinct in her screamed that something waited beneath her feet, calling her name in a voice of fire and ash. She backed away slowly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her phone, still lying on the counter, vibrated again with the same message flashing across its screen. "Come downstairs." Her throat tightened. "I can't," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to. The air grew heavier with each passing second, the scent of smoke creeping into her nostrils, coating her tongue. She felt it in her lungs now, a weight, an ache, as though she had been breathing in fire her whole life, and never noticed until now. The knocking returned, low and muffled, coming from directly beneath her. 3 strikes, pause, 3 more. Each impact sent a faint vibration through the floorboards, rattling the glass on the coffee table. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound sank into her bones, bypassing flesh and muscle entirely. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug, her pulse thundering so loudly she thought she might pass out. "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real," she chanted silently, trying to anchor herself to the present. But deep down, she already knew it was real. Real enough to follow her from a house reduced to ashes. Real enough to make the apartment, her last supposed sanctuary, feel like a trap. She forced herself to her knees, her fingers trembling as she gripped the phone. "What do you want?" she whispered hoarsely. The screen flickered once. Then words scrolled slowly across it. "To finish what you started." Her stomach lurched violently, and she doubled over, gagging on bile and ash that wasn't there. The words burned themselves into her mind, refusing to fade. Finish what you started. But what had she started? She was 8 years old when the fire took her home, her father, her childhood. She couldn't have done anything to deserve this. Could she? Memories tugged at her mind, strange, fractured images she couldn't place. Her father kneeling in the hallway, whispering words she didn't understand. Her mother's face pale with fear in the weeks before she left them. And her own voice, so small, saying something she couldn't recall, as her father's eyes turned toward her with a look of raw desperation. "Stop," she whispered to herself. "Don't think about it. Don't." But the voice in her phone cut her off, louder now, echoing from both the device and the floorboards beneath her. "You told me to knock." Her blood ran cold. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "I didn't. I never." But even as she spoke, a memory surfaced so suddenly it stole the air from her lungs. A game, that's what she'd thought it was, at the time. Her father teaching her a rhythm, a secret knock, so he'd always know it was her on the other side of the door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. She remembered giggling as she tapped it out on the walls of her room. "If you ever get lost, just knock," her father had said, "and I'll find you." But she wasn't lost anymore. He was, and the knocking wasn't a game now. It was a promise kept too late. The glow beneath the floor flared brighter, and the boards creaked as if strained by an immense weight. She could feel it, whatever waited below, pressing up against the wood, eager to break through. She staggered to the door, fumbling with the lock. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to get out of the apartment and never look back. But as her hand closed around the doorknob, her phone vibrated violently in her other hand. The screen flashed. "If you leave, I'll come with you." Her breath hitched. She froze, torn between two impossible choices: stay and face whatever waited in the glow beneath her feet, or run and carry it with her into every corner of her life. She pressed her forehead against the door and sobbed quietly. She was so tired of running. The knocking grew louder, heavier, shaking the entire apartment now. Plaster dust drifted down from the ceiling as the glow beneath her feet pulsed like a heartbeat. The phone vibrated once more, the words scrolling across the screen like a verdict. "Come downstairs. It's time." Her chest heaved as a sob tore free of her throat. "I don't know how," she whispered. "There's no way down." Silence answered her for a long, suffocating moment. Then the voice came again, so close it felt like it spoke from within her own skull. Her vision blurred as the glow beneath her feet intensified, the floorboards warping and splintering. She took one shuddering breath before the wood gave way entirely, collapsing inward in a shower of sparks and ash. And beneath it, impossibly, was a staircase, winding down into darkness, lit only by flickering orange light. The heat rolled up in waves, stinging her eyes and stealing the air from her lungs. She staggered back, her phone slipping from her hands and clattering to the floor. Its screen cracked, but the message remained, frozen there like a final command. "Come home." She stood at the edge of the gaping hole, the faint orange glow licking at the jagged splinters where the floor had collapsed. Heat radiated upward in suffocating waves, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and charred wood. The stairs spiraled down into darkness, impossibly long, impossibly deep. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammering against her ribs. This couldn't be real. There had never been a basement beneath her apartment. Yet the staircase waited, patient and unyielding, as if it had always been there. Her phone lay cracked and silent on the floor behind her, but she didn't need its prompts anymore. The command was already etched into her mind, whispering with every breath. "Come home." She wiped at her tear-streaked face, her fingers shaking violently. She wanted to turn and run, but the thought felt laughable now. Running hadn't saved her before. It wouldn't save her now. One step, that's all it took. The wood groaned under her weight, the sound echoing down into the depths like a warning. She hesitated, gripping the splintered railing. Heat licked at her face, sweat beading on her brow. The air felt thick and wet in her lungs, as though she were already breathing smoke. She took another step, then another, her feet moving with a strange, dreamlike inevitability. Each step creaked louder than the last, the noise swallowed quickly by the darkness below. The further she descended, the dimmer the glow became, as if the light itself were being consumed. The silence pressed against her eardrums, so heavy she thought she might go mad from it. Then, faintly, she heard it, the soft, deliberate rhythm of 3 knocks. Pause, 3 more. The sound came not from below but from all around her, reverberating through the narrow walls of the stairwell. She gripped the railing tighter, her nails biting into the wood. "I'm here," she whispered hoarsely. "I'm coming." The knocking ceased, replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. It wasn't a voice, not yet, but there was intention in it, a presence that felt ancient and hungry. She descended deeper, her eyes straining against the growing darkness. The orange glow had faded almost entirely now, leaving only faint, shifting shadows that danced across the walls like the remnants of a dying fire. She thought of Mrs. Kellen's words, "You'll have to go back." Not just to the house, back to where it began, but where was this? The memory of her father's voice rose unbidden in her mind, whispering words she had long forgotten. "There's more beneath than above, always more beneath." She clenched her jaw to keep from sobbing. She had never understood what he meant back then. Now she feared she did. At last, the stairs ended in a small landing, the floor slick and cold beneath her bare feet. She couldn't see far, just enough to make out the suggestion of a hallway stretching ahead. The walls here were close, too close, as if the space were shrinking the further she ventured in. She pressed forward, her hands trailing along the damp surface of the walls to steady herself. The air grew colder with each step, the heat from above replaced by a bone-deep chill. And still she felt it watching, waiting, its attention so palpable it made her skin crawl. The hallway narrowed further, forcing her to turn sideways to squeeze through. As she moved, she thought she saw faint handprints smudged along the walls, small at first, then larger, stretched unnaturally long, as if clawed into the surface by something desperate to escape. She didn't want to look, she didn't want to know, but her eyes kept darting to those marks, tracing their path as they grew more erratic, more violent. Scratches gouged deep into the plaster. Words scrawled in soot-black fingers. "Let me out. I'm still here. You locked me in." Her stomach turned violently. She stumbled forward, her shoulder brushing against a particularly deep gouge in the wall. The air shifted around her then, a hot breath curling against her neck. She froze, slowly trembling. She turned her head, but there was nothing behind her, nothing but darkness. Then the voice came, so close it felt like it spoke through her own throat. "Why didn't you open the door?" She staggered backward, her hands clamping over her ears. "I didn't know," she cried, her voice cracking. I thought you got out." The darkness pressed closer, thick and cloying, wrapping around her like smoke. The voice whispered again, softer now, but edged with unmistakable venom. "You never checked, you never stayed, you ran." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, shaking violently. "I was a child," she whispered through sobs. "I didn't know what to do." The silence that followed was worse than the accusations, heavy with the weight of something unsaid. Then came the knocking. Not on the walls this time, but directly beneath her, so loud it rattled her teeth. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. She pressed her palms flat against the cold floor, feeling the vibrations travel up her arms. Her phone, still somewhere above her, cracked and forgotten, began to ring faintly in the distance, the sound distorted as though coming from underwater. She couldn't answer it. She couldn't go back. The only way now was forward. She pushed herself to her feet and forced one trembling step after another, down the narrowing hall. As she moved, a faint light appeared ahead, orange flickering, like a candle in a window. Her breath hitched as she drew closer. The smell of smoke thickened, mingling with something sweeter, burnt sugar, charred wood. She knew that smell. It was the smell of her house, the night it burned. And as she turned the final corner, she saw it. A door, warped and blackened with fire, standing impossibly intact in the middle of the corridor. 3 fresh knocks echoed from the other side. She stared at the door, her entire body trembling, as if every nerve was strung too tight. The blackened wood seemed to breathe with faint, pulsing light from deep within its cracks, as though embers still burned behind it. Smoke curled out around the edges, licking at the damp walls of the corridor. The air was heavy, wet with heat, and beneath it was the faint smell of something older, sour, and metallic, like rusted iron left too long in the rain. 3 more knocks shook the door, each one so deep she felt them in her teeth. Pause. 3 again. Her breath hitched. The sound was familiar. Too familiar. It wasn't just the rhythm, it was the weight behind it, the restrained violence that seemed to say, "I've waited long enough." She pressed her hands to her ears, but the pounding carried on, bypassing her senses and driving straight into her skull. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't know you were still inside." The door answered with a creak, not from opening, but from something massive shifting behind it. The voice came then, softer than the knocks but louder somehow in her mind, curling tight around her thoughts. "You left me. You told me to knock if I was afraid. You told me you'd come. You lied." She sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, and covered her mouth with her hands to hold back a sob. "I was a child," she whispered through her fingers. "I thought you were right behind me. I thought—" The words caught in her throat as the door rattled violently, the sound like bones snapping under immense pressure. The voice hissed again, so close she swore she felt lips at her ear. "Then open it. Prove you're not afraid anymore." Her stomach turned violently. The very idea of touching that handle made bile rise in her throat. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull, the quiet, terrible logic of it. She had fled once. Fleeing again would only prolong this. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as though her own body might betray her if she moved too fast. Her hand hovered over the scorched doorknob, the heat radiating off it, searing her skin before she even made contact. The knocks had stopped, replaced by a silence so absolute it seemed to hum in her ears. She pressed her palm flat against the door and felt the faintest vibration, like a heart beating on the other side. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt me." The voice answered softly, almost tender now. "I only want to come home." Her throat tightened as she wrapped her fingers around the knob. The metal burned, but she didn't let go. Slowly, with trembling hands, she turned it. The door swung inward with a sound like a dying breath, and heat rolled over her in a wave so intense it staggered her backward. The room beyond wasn't a room at all. It was her childhood home, perfectly preserved, lit by the flickering orange glow of fire, licking at the curtains and walls. Her old bedroom sat at the end of the hallway, the door ajar, a faint sobbing sound drifting out. She stepped forward, barefoot on the burning floorboards, and the fire didn't touch her. It parted like water, curling around her as if recognizing its maker. She reached the bedroom door and pushed it open. Inside, her younger self sat huddled in the corner, knees pulled tight to her chest, face streaked with soot and tears. Her father stood over her, his figure warped and blackened by smoke, his eyes twin coals burning in the shadow of his ruined face. He turned slowly toward her, his lips curling into a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "You came back," he rasped, his voice like crackling wood. The air grew heavier, the walls closing in, the fire climbing higher. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her father's smile widened as he took a step toward her, his form shifting with each movement, flickering between man and something else entirely, something long and thin, with too many joints, its fingers like charred branches. "Do you remember what you said?" The voice hissed, overlapping itself now, growing deeper, richer, impossibly layered. "You said you'd knock if you got lost. But I was the one lost." His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist with impossible heat. She screamed as her skin blistered beneath his touch, but she couldn't pull away. "You never knocked for me." Her knees buckled under the pain, but still she held his burning gaze. "I'm here now," she choked out. "I came back. Let me fix it." The voice whispered, softer now, almost sorrowful. "Then let me in." Her eyes darted to her younger self in the corner, still sobbing silently, still unaware of the nightmare unfolding just feet away. She realized with sudden clarity that she wasn't looking at a memory. She was looking at the moment she had left, the moment it had been trapped. And now it wanted to finish. Her father, or what remained of him, tightened his grip, and she felt the skin crack and split beneath his burning hand. "Let me in," he repeated, the words vibrating through her bones. She didn't know what it meant, but she nodded anyway. "Yes," she whispered, "come in." There was a sound like a great exhale, and the flames roared higher, blinding her in their intensity. The heat vanished in an instant, replaced by a biting cold that sank deep into her marrow. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her apartment, lying on the floor. The hole in the floorboards was gone. The air smelled faintly of ash, but no smoke drifted through the room. She pushed herself up slowly, her wrist throbbing where the burning hand had held her. Angry red marks circled her skin, the faint imprint of fingers etched there like a brand. Her phone buzzed weakly nearby, the cracked screen lighting up one final time. "Welcome home." Then it went dark for good. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator had vanished, as though the building itself were holding its breath. She sat on the cold floor, cradling her wrist where the red marks still burned like fresh embers. The faint smell of smoke lingered, clinging to her clothes and hair like an invisible shroud. She reached for her phone, but the screen remained dark and lifeless, unresponsive to her shaking fingers. The words, "Welcome home," still echoed in her mind, their weight settling heavy in her chest. She wasn't sure what she had let in, only that it was here now. The air felt different somehow, thicker, charged with a tension that made her skin prickle. She rose unsteadily to her feet, her knees weak as though she'd been running for miles. The apartment looked the same, but she couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. Subtle, invisible, waiting. She stumbled to the bathroom, needing water, needing anything to ground herself in the present. The mirror caught her as she passed, and for a moment she didn't recognize the reflection staring back. Her face was pale, gaunt, her eyes ringed with deep shadows that hadn't been there before. But it wasn't just exhaustion that unsettled her. Behind her own reflection, in the depths of the glass, a faint shape loomed, tall, gaunt, its fingers too long, curled slightly, as if preparing to knock. She spun around violently, heart pounding against her ribs. Nothing, only the tiled wall and the faint drip of a leaky faucet. She turned back to the mirror, and the shape was gone. But the memory of it clung like a second skin. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't sure she ever had been. The sound came again later, soft at first, barely audible over her uneven breathing. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls, the floor, or the ceiling. It was coming from inside her apartment. She froze where she stood, her back pressed to the kitchen counter. The sound was closer than ever now. 3 deliberate knocks. Pause. 3 more. They came from the bedroom door. She stared at the closed door across the living room, her breath shallow, every muscle in her body coiled tight. She hadn't closed it. She never closed it. But now it stood shut, the faintest curl of black smoke seeping out from underneath. Her mouth went dry. Her phone remained dead on the counter beside her, offering no guidance, no demands. This wasn't about commands anymore. It was already here. She took one hesitant step toward the bedroom, then another. The floorboards felt soft under her bare feet, almost spongy, as though the wood had been soaked through. A faint heat radiated from beneath, growing stronger with each step. The knocking continued, steady and patient, not violent, not yet. It was waiting. She reached the door and pressed her palm against it. The wood was hot, pulsing faintly, like a living thing. Her father's words from long ago rose unbidden in her mind. Never answer if it knocks from inside. But she hadn't listened then, and it was too late now. She wrapped her fingers around the knob. This time, it was cold, freezing, the chill biting into her skin, like tiny teeth. She turned it slowly. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. The door swung inward, and for a moment she thought she saw her bedroom just as it had been, familiar and safe. But then the walls rippled like smoke, and the furniture melted away, replaced by charred beams and blackened wallpaper. The room was her childhood home again, frozen mid-burn. Flames licked lazily at the edges of the walls, but they gave off no heat, now, only light. And in the center stood her father, or what was left of him. His shape was indistinct, his body shifting between solid and smoke, his face featureless except for those burning eyes. He raised one long-fingered hand and pointed at her. "You opened the door," he whispered, though his mouth didn't move. The words vibrated through her skull like a second heartbeat. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to obey. "You let me in." The voice grew louder, overlapping with itself, as if countless mouths spoke in unison. The figure stepped closer, and she could feel the air around her grow heavy, pressing against her chest until it hurt to breathe. "Now there's no door to shut." She stumbled backward into the hallway, but the apartment had changed. The walls were blackened, cracked, faint orange light, flickering deep in the seams. The air reeked of smoke, sweet and acrid all at once, and faint whispers curled in her ears. "You ran once, will you run again?" Her phone vibrated in her hand suddenly, though she didn't remember picking it up. The cracked screen glowed faintly. One word pulsed there. "Stay." She pressed herself against the hallway wall, clutching the phone to her chest. Her father's figure, or the thing wearing his shape, stepped into the doorway, its body too tall now, its arms stretching unnaturally long, until its fingers brushed the floor. "I'm home now," it said. The knocking resumed, but this time it wasn't coming from any one place. It came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, even the air itself, as though reality had become a drum for its endless rhythm. 3 strikes, pause, 3 more, over and over, louder and louder, until her bones vibrated with the sound. She squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing, as the knocks echoed through her skull.
You can't shut me out again." When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the hallway. She stood outside her childhood home. It was whole again, its windows glowing faintly with firelight. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying that same sweet, cloying scent. Then she turned to flee, but the street behind her stretched endlessly into darkness, no sign of escape. And from inside the house came the sound that haunted her still. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. The front door creaked open slightly, and the voice whispered, soft and coaxing, "Come home. It's where you've always been."
The front door yawned wider as though breathing her in, its hinges creaking like old bones shifting in the dark. She stood frozen on the cracked front steps, her bare feet pressing into splinters of wood that felt too warm, too alive. Smoke curled lazily from the open doorway, and the faint scent of her childhood, burnt sugar, lavender detergent, and something sharper, metallic, drifted out with it. She wanted to scream, to turn and run down the long black road behind her, but no matter how far she strained her eyes, there was nothing beyond the house. Only an endless void pressing in like a closing fist. A soft, coaxing voice whispered from the open door, "You've always been here. You never left." The words seeped under her skin, curling around her ribs like vines. She forced her foot forward, then another, the wood groaning under her weight, as if protesting her return. The air grew hotter, denser, every breath tasting faintly of ash. Inside, the house was eerily still. The walls bore the faintest scorch marks, and the wallpaper peeled in jagged strips like shedding skin. Her shoes left faint prints in a layer of soot coating the floorboards. She moved carefully, each step measured, the silence around her so thick, it felt like it might swallow sound entirely. Then came the knock, so close this time, it felt like it came from her own chest. 3 slow strikes. Pause. 3 more. She pressed a hand to her sternum, as if to hold it in. Her breath hitched. "Where are you?" she whispered, though she feared the answer. The faint glow of firelight pulsed down the hallway, drawing her toward the bedroom at the end. She tried to fight it, her muscles screaming to turn back, but her feet carried her forward against her will. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices in a chorus of accusation and longing. "You opened the door. You let me in. You never knocked for me." The bedroom door stood ajar, the glow leaking out like a bleeding wound. She hesitated, her palm pressed to the rough wood. It felt warm beneath her hand, not hot like fire, but warm like flesh. From inside came a sound that made her blood run cold. Her father's laugh. But it wasn't the warm, deep chuckle she remembered. It was hollow, brittle, as though something was imitating him and hadn't yet learned how to sound human. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice breaking on the word. The laughter stopped abruptly. Silence followed. Then softly, almost lovingly, "Come in, sweetheart." Her stomach lurched. She didn't want to go in. She didn't want to see what wore her father's voice like a mask. But something stronger than fear pushed her forward. The room was just as she remembered it, and not. The bed was neatly made, her favorite stuffed bear propped up on the pillow. But the edges of the room wavered like heat haze, the walls blackened and cracked, the ceiling scorched. In the far corner, her father sat in his old recliner, a faint smile playing on his charred lips. His face was barely there, features burned away into shadows and ash, but his eyes glowed like coals,
fixed on her with unblinking intensity. "You've grown," he said softly, his voice like wind through dry leaves. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her throat had closed up, her body locked in place by a fear so profound it felt like drowning. "Do you remember," he continued, rising slowly to his feet, "what you told me before you left?" She shook her head violently, tears blurring her vision. "You said you'd knock if you ever needed me, but you never did." His voice deepened, the edges splitting, as if countless echoes layered behind it. "I waited." He took a step toward her. "I knocked." Another step, and still, you ran. The room darkened with each word, the flickering firelight dimming, until only his glowing eyes remained. She stumbled backward, her shoulder hitting the doorframe. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I thought you were behind me. I thought you got out." His smile widened, cracking his charred face in two. "And now you're back. To finish what you started." His long fingers reached for her, their tips blackened and sharp, trailing faint embers in the air. Her back hit the hallway wall. She was out of the room now, but the space behind her stretched endlessly in both directions. No front door, no escape, only corridor upon corridor of blackened wallpaper and scorched carpet. She turned frantically, searching for any sign of exit. The knocking began again, so loud it rattled her teeth, coming from every wall, every door, every surface around her. 3. Pause. 3. Over and over. Her knees buckled, and she fell hard to the floor, clutching her head as the sound reverberated through her skull. "Stop," she whispered. "Please stop." But the voice didn't stop. It pressed closer, the words sinking into her ears like hot wax. "I'm not knocking anymore. I'm already inside."
She curled tighter on the scorched floor. Her hands clamped over her ears, but the knocking was everywhere now, inside her head, inside her chest. It wasn't just sound anymore. It had weight, rhythm, a force that made her bones vibrate and her teeth ache. She sobbed as the voice coiled in her mind, its words low and venomous. "You opened the door. You let me in. You thought you were safe." She squeezed her eyes shut, rocking back and forth, as if motion could hold back the rising terror. "You're not real," she whispered to herself, though her voice broke on the words. "You're not here." But the laugh came again, not her father's, not human. It was a sound like wood snapping under pressure, like flames cracking through dry timber. "I've been here since you left. I was here when you laughed in this house. I was here when you screamed." The heat pulsed around her, wrapping tight like an embrace. The floor beneath her shifted suddenly, softening like hot tar. Her hands shot out to steady herself, but her fingers sank slightly into the boards. She yelped, jerking back, only to feel the walls ripple against her shoulder, as if alive. A low hum filled the corridor, deep and resonant, vibrating her very teeth. "Let me go," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean to." The corridor answered with another knock, louder now, like a battering ram striking her skull. Then the voice, "You're not leaving this time. You're staying." She tried to crawl backward, but the floor clung to her palms and knees, its surface growing stickier, hotter, like the house itself was trying to swallow her whole. A sudden shriek of splintering wood made her flinch violently. She whipped her head around in time to see the corridor behind her begin to crumble. The walls fell away into blackness, the floorboards cracking and dropping into an endless void. One by one, doors along the hallway were yanked open by unseen hands, slamming back violently against the walls. From each, faint shapes began to emerge, tall, thin figures with two long fingers and faces blurred into smoke. They moved silently, yet their presence screamed in her mind. Each of them carried the same burning eyes, the same fire coiling through their hollow frames. She recognized them, not from memory, but from her dreams. The ones who knocked in the walls when she was a child. The ones her father said would never get in if she stayed quiet. They hadn't knocked to come in. They had knocked because they were already there. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, her tears streaking soot across her cheeks. "What do you want?" The figures stopped moving, their forms flickering faintly, as though they were struggling to hold shape. Then in unison they spoke, not aloud but straight into her head. "We want to come back. You left us here. You locked us out." Her stomach twisted violently, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. The night of the fire. She had run to the front door, coughing and crying, her father behind her shouting something. But she hadn't looked back. She hadn't checked. She'd slammed the door shut and kept running, leaving behind not just her father, but everything that had been in that house. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "You're lying. I didn't." But her words faltered as the first of the figures stepped closer, its shape growing more distinct. She could almost see her father's features on its face, but they were wrong, stretched too far, hollowed out by flame and smoke. Its fingers reached for her, and though they didn't touch her skin, she felt the heat anyway, an ache that sank straight into her bones. "You did," it said, its voice both her father's and something else entirely. "You locked us in. You promised you'd knock for us if you ever needed help. But you never did, so we kept knocking. We kept waiting." The floor shuddered violently, throwing her onto her side. The walls pulsed like a living throat around her, their blackened surface heaving with each heartbeat. She clutched at the boards beneath her, but they were soft now, sagging like flesh under her fingers. The figures loomed closer, their glowing eyes pinning her in place. "You can't leave this time. There's no door to run through, no lock to turn." Her breathing came in shallow gasps, each inhale tasting of smoke and something sour beneath it. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat like a swallowed coal. Then, faintly, she heard a sound that didn't belong, a ringtone. Her phone. Somehow, impossibly, it was ringing from deep in her pocket. She fumbled for it, her fingers slipping against the slick, soot-stained screen. The name flashing across the cracked glass made her blood run cold. "Dad." Her hands shook violently as she swiped to answer. "Hello," she croaked, her voice hoarse. Static hissed on the other end, followed by the faint sound of knocking. 3 slow strikes. Pause. 3 more. Then his voice. "It's not me. It never was. Don't let it in again." Before she could respond, the figures surged forward, their hands outstretched, their whispers rising to a deafening chorus. "You opened the door once. Open it again." The floor split open beneath her, and she fell into darkness, their long fingers reaching after her as the void swallowed her whole. The fall seemed endless, the blackness swallowing sound, light, and even thought. Her body floated weightless, her mind fracturing with each heartbeat. But then impact, hard. She hit something cold and unyielding, air exploding from her lungs in a sharp gasp. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on her childhood bedroom floor. The carpet was scorched black, the air thick with smoke, Yet no flames licked the walls. The faint orange glow pulsed beyond the window, and outside shadows moved, tall, thin figures pacing back and forth like restless sentries. She pushed herself up slowly, her body aching as if every bone had been rattled loose. The knocking had stopped. The silence was absolute, almost mocking. She staggered to her feet and reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like trying to move a wall. She pressed her ear to it, straining to hear anything beyond. Nothing. No voices. No movement. But then 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. They came from the closet this time. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned her head toward the narrow wooden door on the far side of the room. Smoke curled from beneath it, and faint whispers bled through the keyhole. "You promised you'd knock if you were scared." Her legs trembled as she took a step closer. "We've been waiting so long. Knock for us." She reached the closet, her hand shaking violently as she pressed her palm to the wood. It was cold, deathly cold. Despite the heat in the room, the whispers grew louder, layered and dissonant, like hundreds of voices speaking at once. "Knock for us." She shook her head, tears streaming freely down her soot-streaked face. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't know how." But her hand moved on its own, curling into a fist. She hesitated, her knuckles hovering inches from the door. "Knock for us." The voices pressed closer, weaving around her thoughts, until she could no longer tell where they ended, and she began. Her fist slammed against the door once, twice, 3 times. Pause. 3 more. The sound echoed unnaturally, reverberating through the walls and into her chest. For a moment there was nothing. Then from deep inside the closet, something answered. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. But these were heavier, deeper, as though struck by something massive with too many hands. The closet door shuddered violently, dust raining from the ceiling. She stumbled backward, her heart hammering so loud she could hear nothing else. From inside came a low groan, the sound of wood splintering and nails tearing free. The whispers rose to a deafening chorus. "You let us out once. Do it again." A hand, long and blackened like charred wood, pushed through the crack between the door and the frame. Fingers stretched impossibly far, nails scraping grooves into the floor. She screamed, her back hitting the far wall as she clawed at the door behind her, still locked, still unyielding. The closet door rattled harder, then began to open inch by inch. Heat poured out in waves, carrying the stench of smoke, and something far more ancient, like earth left undisturbed for centuries. A shape began to emerge from the closet, tall, spindly, its face a shifting mass of ash and ember. Its eyes found her instantly, burning with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. "You called us," it hissed, its voice both thunderous and intimate, filling the room and her skull simultaneously. "Now we are here." She shook her head violently, sobs tearing from her throat. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." The creature's smile was wide and jagged, its teeth like shards of glass. "But you opened the door, and doors." It stepped fully into the room now, its body flickering between smoke and flesh. "Don't stay shut forever." The walls of the bedroom began to dissolve, peeling away like wet paper. Behind them was only darkness, infinite and suffocating. More figures emerged from the void, their long fingers trailing faint sparks as they moved. She pressed herself against the last patch of solid wall, her breathing ragged. "What do you want from me?" she cried. The first figure tilted its head, the sound of cracking embers following the motion. "You brought us here. Now let us stay." The others echoed the words like a chant. "Let us stay. Let us stay. Let us stay." She shook her head, her voice raw.
This isn't my home. This isn't real. But the first figure stepped closer, lowering its massive face until its ember eyes were level with hers. It is now. With a sound like 1,000 doors slamming shut, the darkness rushed forward, swallowing the room, the house, her entire world. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. Only silence, and then 3 knocks. Pause, 3 more. They didn't come from outside. They didn't even come from the walls. They came from her own chest.
The sound wouldn't stop. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Each strike vibrated deep in her chest, shaking her ribs, echoing up her throat until her teeth clicked together. She clutched at her shirt, desperate to still the sensation, but it only grew stronger, more insistent. Her knees buckled, and she fell hard onto a cold, hard surface that wasn't her childhood home. She gasped, eyes flying open. She was back in her apartment, or what was left of it. The walls were blackened and blistered, the ceiling sagging as though it had borne years of smoke and flame. Ash floated in the air, settling on her hair and skin like a soft snowfall. She tried to move, but her body felt foreign now, heavy, wrong. Her hands trembled violently as she brought them to her chest. The knocking was there inside her. I let it in, she thought faintly. I didn't close the door. A low hum vibrated through the apartment, rising and falling like a distant chant. The sound was familiar now, almost comforting in a terrible way. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was her. The hum lived in her bones, in her blood. She stumbled to her feet, gripping the countertop for balance. Her reflection in the cracked microwave door caught her eye, and her breath caught in her throat. Her pupils had widened unnaturally, swallowing almost all the color of her irises. Faint, ember-like flecks pulsed within the blackness, flaring in rhythm with the knocks in her chest. She reached out, fingers brushing the glass, and for the briefest moment, the reflection smiled back, though her own face hadn't moved. The smile wasn't hers. It was too wide, too knowing. She recoiled violently, knocking over a coffee mug that shattered on the soot-coated floor. Her breathing quickened, each inhale rasping like her lungs were coated in ash. She pressed her hands to her mouth to muffle a sob. "This isn't real," she whispered, though the words felt hollow even as they left her lips. The air shifted behind her. She felt it before she heard it, a faint warmth pressing against her back like breath. The voice came next, low and rich, curling around her thoughts. "You brought us home. You wear the door now." Her stomach churned violently. The door, she spun around, but the apartment was empty. No figure, no glowing eyes, only the faint sound of dripping water somewhere far off, echoing endlessly. She staggered backward until her shoulders hit the wall. The knocks grew louder, more insistent, rattling her ribcage. She slammed her fists against her chest, as if to silence them, but the rhythm only quickened. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, faster now, urgent. She felt something shift under her skin, something long and thin brushing against the inside of her ribs. Her scream was choked off as her chest expanded unnaturally, her skin stretching, straining. The voice whispered again, closer this time. "They're still knocking. Let them out." She fell to her knees, gasping, as the knocking reached a fever pitch. Her phone vibrated suddenly on the floor beside her, its cracked screen flickering weakly. She snatched it up, desperate for some tether to reality. One notification glowed faintly. "UN caller." Hands trembling, she answered. Static hissed on the line before a familiar voice broke through, her father's. "You have to close the door, before it's too late." Her breath hitched. "How?" she whispered. Tell me how. But the line dissolved into harsh static, then silence. Her fingers curled tight around the phone until the screen cracked further, the faint glow fading to black. A new sound joined the knocking, then scratching, from beneath her skin. It started in her chest, then her arms, her legs, her throat, as if long fingers were dragging themselves along her insides, searching for a way out. The whispers returned, rising in pitch, weaving through her thoughts, until they were indistinguishable from her own voice. You opened the door, now you are the door. Knock for us, knock for us. Her hands clawed at her chest, nails digging into her skin, until she felt hot blood beneath her fingertips. The voice was deafening now. Let us out. Then silence. The knocking stopped. The whispers ceased. The hum faded. For one precious, impossible second, she felt normal, whole. Her ragged breathing echoed in the quiet apartment. She collapsed onto her side, shaking, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The quiet wasn't peace. It was waiting. The silence was worse than the knocking. It wasn't stillness. It was the sense of something watching, listening, waiting. She pressed her back against the blackened wall, her chest rising and falling in uneven, shallow breaths. Her hands hovered near her chest, as though afraid to touch it, afraid to feel movement beneath her skin again. The faint metallic tang of blood lingered in the air, where her nails had broken the surface, and already she could feel the skin knitting itself together with a heat that wasn't natural. Her reflection in the soot-streaked microwave door still stared back, but now its eyes pulsed faintly, with an ember glow in the rhythm she'd come to dread. 3 beats. Pause. 3 more. She squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her palms to her ears. It's not real, she whispered, over and over, but her voice sounded hollow in the dense, smoke-heavy air. Then a sound broke the quiet. Not knocking, not yet. This was softer, almost like a sigh. It came from the apartment door. Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment she dared hope. Maybe it was someone outside, a neighbor, help. But deep down, she already knew better. The sound came again, closer this time. A long exhale, warm and damp, as though some vast thing pressed its mouth to the other side of the door. She took a trembling step forward, her bare feet sticking slightly to the soot-coated floor. The air around her felt thicker, charged like before a thunderstorm. The voice came softly now, curling under her skin. You don't have to knock anymore. You are the door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, the metal cold and slick with condensation. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. I won't let you in. But even as she said it, she felt the truth gnawing at her. She had already let them in. She could feel them in her chest, curled tight like sleeping creatures, their long fingers brushing her ribs as they shifted restlessly. The memory of the closet returned, the way the first figure had emerged, grinning, stretching impossibly tall, until its face blocked out everything else. Once opened, never shut, it had whispered. Her stomach turned violently. She doubled over as the knocking began again, not from the walls this time, but from deep within her own body. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 more. The apartment door rattled suddenly, hard enough to make the frame groan. She staggered backward, pressing herself against the kitchen counter. The rattling escalated into pounding. The voice outside rose with it, no longer soft but urgent, layered and dissonant, like a chorus of voices screaming in unison. Let us out. Let us out. Her chest burned as if something inside clawed at her sternum, desperate to tear its way free. She clutched at her ribs, her nails biting into the skin. "Stop!" she screamed. "I'm not the door, I'm not." But the pounding was deafening now, shaking the floor, rattling the cabinets, sending flakes of charred paint raining from the ceiling. Then, abruptly, silence. She stood frozen, gasping for breath, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst. The doorknob began to turn slowly. Once, twice, the sound of metal grinding filled the air, as if the lock itself protested the intrusion. Her phone vibrated weakly on the counter beside her. She snatched it up without thinking, the cracked screen glowing faintly with one message. "Calls, it'll be it." Her breath hitched. "Close it." "How?" she whispered. The screen flickered, then another message appeared. "Call, knock back, seal it." Her stomach twisted. Knock back. But how? The door swung open before she could move, and heat poured in like a living thing, wrapping her in its suffocating embrace. The apartment beyond was gone. In its place stood the smoldering ruins of her childhood home, the walls ablaze, the air thick with smoke, and the faint sound of crying. A single figure stood in the doorway, impossibly tall, its long fingers curling lazily as it stepped forward. Its ember eyes locked onto hers, and the smile that spread across its blackened face was wide enough to split its skull. "Too late," it whispered. "The door is open, and you are hollow." The heat hit her first, a wave so intense it felt like her skin might blister on contact. She staggered backward as the figure stepped through the doorway, the floorboards blackening beneath its long, spindly feet. Its head tilted slightly, those ember eyes boring into her as though peering straight through flesh and bone into whatever lay beneath. "You can't close what you've become," it murmured, its voice deep and resonant, like an ancient bell struck underwater. She tried to back away further, but her spine met the kitchen wall. Her chest ached with each breath, the knocking inside her ribcage growing louder, faster, as if answering the rhythm of its steps. 3 strikes, pause, 3 more. She pressed her hands to her chest, her fingers clawing at her skin, desperate to rip the sound out. The figure's mouth widened into a smile too large for any human face, and its long fingers flexed lazily at its sides. "We waited so long, and you never knocked. Now we knock from within." Its words seemed to come from everywhere, the air, the walls, the floor beneath her feet. She felt the sound vibrating through her bones, setting her teeth on edge. "I didn't mean to let you in," she gasped, tears cutting streaks through the soot on her cheeks. "It doesn't matter." The voice was softer now, almost kind. "We're here now. You are the door, and doors only stay shut if someone keeps them closed." She doubled over suddenly as something sharp scraped against her ribs from the inside. A thin trickle of blood ran down from her mouth, hot and metallic. The whispers came again, closer, louder, curling through her mind like smoke. "Knock for us. Let us through." Her phone buzzed violently in her pocket, and with shaking hands she fumbled it out. The screen flashed wildly, a single message repeating over and over, "Come, knock back, seal it. Come, knock back, seal it." She stared at the words through blurred vision, her heart pounding in her ears. Knock back. But how? She couldn't even move without feeling them stir beneath her skin. The figure loomed closer, its towering shape blotting out the faint glow from the doorway behind it. Its voice dropped to a whisper so intimate It felt pressed against her ear. You opened us once, you'll open us again. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. The knocking in her chest, now so strong it felt like her ribs might crack under the force. Let us out, the voice hissed. We've been patient, we've been good. Let us out. She felt their fingers dragging up the inside of her throat, scratching softly as though preparing to split her open. No, she whispered hoarsely, clutching at her chest. Not again. She forced herself to her knees, her body trembling violently under the weight of their presence. I let you in, she said, through gritted teeth. But I never let you stay. The figure tilted its head, its ember eyes narrowing faintly. You have no choice. Once open, it doesn't stay shut. She finished for it, her voice stronger now. Her fist rose shakily and slammed against her own sternum. Once, twice, 3 times, pause, 3 more. The sound echoed through the apartment unnaturally, louder than flesh on bone should ever be. The figure flinched back slightly, its grin faltering. The air around her shifted violently, the walls of the apartment flickering between charred ruin and pristine white. The knocking inside her chest slowed, faltered. She struck again. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. This time the sound resonated outward like a shock wave, rattling the cabinets and sending cracks spider-webbing across the floor. The figure let out a low hiss, smoke pouring from its mouth as it staggered backward. You don't know what you're doing, it snarled. But her voice was steady now, even as tears streamed down her face. I'm sealing the door. The figure reeled back, its ember eyes flaring like dying stars. Smoke poured from cracks in its skin, curling toward the ceiling in long, writhing tendrils. The air pulsed around her, each heartbeat syncing with her own slow knocks. 3. Pause. 3 more. The vibrations rattled the apartment, shaking loose ash from the scorched ceiling. She could feel them now, the things inside her thrashing violently, as if her knocking disoriented them. Their whispers rose into a panicked chorus. Stop, you'll trap us again. Her fist struck her sternum once more, the sound deep and resonant like a bell tolling in a cathedral. I should have done this years ago, she whispered through gritted teeth. The figure lunged forward, its long fingers stretching for her face. Enough, it roared, but its voice was strained now, breaking apart like wood, splintering under pressure. She didn't flinch. Her knuckles met her chest again. 3. Pause. 3 more. The impact sent another wave rippling outward, the walls flickering faster between their ruined and untouched states. The figure let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more a howl of frustration and desperation. Its towering form wavered, edges crumbling like ash caught in a breeze. We waited, it hissed, its voice splitting into dozens of overlapping tones. We knocked. We were patient. Don't shut us out again. But she didn't stop. Her knocks became faster now, harder, each strike reverberating through her body. Her vision blurred as tears and sweat stung her eyes, but she kept going. The knocking inside her chest faltered, skipped, then slowed. The fingers clawing at her ribs withdrew like retreating spiders. You don't belong here, she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. This is my body, my life, my door. The figure staggered, smoke pouring from every crack in its burning frame. Its smile collapsed, revealing a void where its mouth had been. You'll need us, it whispered, its voice fading into a dry rasp. You always do. With one final forceful knock to her chest, the apartment shuddered violently. A sound like a massive door slamming shut reverberated through the space. And then, silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The figure crumbled before her eyes, its tall, spindly body collapsing into a heap of cold ash. The ember glow in its eyes flickered, one last time, and went dark. She stood, trembling, in the center of the room, clutching at her aching chest. The burning sensation was gone. The knocking had stopped. For the first time in days, or had it been years, her body was her own. She stumbled to the window and looked out. The city beyond was normal again. No smoke, no fire, no endless void, just lights, cars, and people moving about their lives, as if nothing had happened. Her reflection caught her eye, in the glass. She stared at herself, pale, bloodied, soot-streaked, but alive. And yet, something felt wrong. Her pupils were normal again. No ember flecks, no glow, but deep in her ears, she thought she heard it. A faint sound, almost imperceptible. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. She pressed her hands to her head, shaking violently. "No," she whispered. "It's over. I closed it." But a familiar vibration began, deep in her chest, so subtle it could have been her heartbeat, or something else. The whispers returned, faint and teasing, curling like smoke around her thoughts. Doors don't stay shut forever, and neither do we. The silence in the apartment wasn't comforting. It pressed against her skin like damp cloth, heavy and suffocating, filling her ears with the phantom echo of her own frantic heartbeat. She thought she'd won, that her final knock had slammed the door shut and left them behind, sealed in the scorched ruins where they belonged. But the stillness was wrong. Too perfect, too heavy. She stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her hands trembling at her sides as her eyes darted from wall to wall. The soot-blackened paint seemed darker now, thicker somehow, as if shadows had been painted over old scars. She tried to tell herself the faint sound she heard, soft, almost imperceptible, was her imagination. But deep down, she knew. It was there. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. The sound didn't come from the walls or the door this time. It came from her chest, faint but deliberate, like a heartbeat just out of sync. She pressed both hands hard against her sternum, fingers splayed, desperate to feel nothing at all. But she felt it. The vibration was subtle, but it was there, like something shifting beneath her ribs. Her breath caught. "I sealed you," she whispered, though her voice was too soft to fill the still air. "You're not supposed to be here anymore." But no answer came, only that heavy, waiting silence. She thought about calling for help, but who could she call? Who would believe she'd become the door? The apartment seemed to sigh, the air growing warmer around her as though exhaling. She stumbled back a step, her foot hitting the edge of the couch. The sensation of being watched tightened like a noose around her throat, a prickling awareness on her neck and shoulders that left her skin crawling. She turned slowly toward the hallway. The bathroom door, which she was certain she'd left open, was shut now. A faint glow, orange pulsing, leaked out from the gap under the door. Her legs refused to move. Something inside her chest shifted again, scraping lightly against her ribs. She winced, clutching her shirt as if the thin fabric could keep it in. The knock came again, soft, mocking. 3 beats. Pause. 3 more. She staggered forward, every step feeling like wading through heavy smoke. The bathroom door loomed larger with each stride, the glow growing brighter, until it painted the hallway walls with flickering shadows. She pressed her ear against the door before she could stop herself. The whisper came instantly. "We told you. Doors don't stay shut forever." Her stomach turned violently. She wanted to run, but her feet held her in place, as though the floor itself clung to her soles. She yanked her head back from the door, gasping. Her reflection caught her eye in the soot-smeared hallway mirror, gaunt, pale, with dark streaks under her wide, staring eyes. But something was wrong. Her pupils weren't right. The faintest glow burned there, ember flecks pulsing in that same rhythm. 3 pause 3. She raised a shaking hand to her face, but her reflection didn't mirror the gesture. Instead, it smiled. Slowly, wider than her own mouth could stretch. The smile didn't stop. It tore impossibly across her cheeks until it split, revealing teeth too long and sharp to be human. Her stomach lurched as bile burned her throat. She stumbled backward, knocking into the wall, her hand scraping against the rough plaster. The mirror version of her raised its hand, pressing its palm flat against the glass. A faint sound followed. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. She choked back a scream. The knocking grew louder now, reverberating not just through her chest, but through the apartment itself. The floor vibrated softly under her bare feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling, stirred by some unseen force. She pressed her palms over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. "This isn't real. It isn't real," she chanted, her voice cracking. But behind her eyelids, the orange glow remained, searing bright, even in darkness. A heat curled in her chest, not like fire this time, but like breath, humid and alive. It pressed outward gently at first, then harder, as though testing the strength of her bones. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. The whispers returned, soft, coaxing. "You don't have to knock anymore. You are the door. Let us through." She slammed her fists against her ribcage. "No!" she screamed, though it came out more as a sob. Her voice echoed oddly, swallowed by the thick air. The bathroom door rattled suddenly, the glow beneath it flaring brighter. Shadows flickered wildly across the hallway walls, stretching long and thin like skeletal fingers, reaching out to grab her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and with trembling hands, she pulled it out. The screen flickered with a new message. "Calm, knock back. Seal it. Now." Her breath came in shallow gasps. She didn't know if she could. Last time she'd nearly torn herself apart, just to force them out. What if this time they didn't leave? What if knocking back only opened her further? Her phone vibrated again, harder now, almost jumping out of her grip. A second message. "If you don't seal it, you'll become it." The knocking in her chest quickened, matching the violent shudders of her phone. She dropped it, the screen cracking as it hit the floor. The glow beneath the bathroom door suddenly vanished. So did the knocking, gone in an instant. She froze, the silence so abrupt. It felt unnatural, like the world had paused. Then she heard it, breathing, slow, deep. It wasn't hers. It came from all around her, seeping through the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Hot breath rolled across the back of her neck. She turned slowly, her pulse pounding in her ears. The hallway stretched impossibly long now, the walls pulsing faintly, like the sides of a living throat. At the far end, where the apartment's front door should have been, there was only darkness. And in that darkness, faintly, 3 knocks. Pause, 3 more. She couldn't bring herself to move. The hallway felt alive now, stretching and contracting with each slow breath that echoed through the apartment. Her eyes darted back to the bathroom door. It stood utterly still now, no glow, no rattling, but the air around it wavered faintly, as if heat bled from the wood. The knocking had stopped, but silence was worse. It was thick and waiting, like the moment before a predator pounces. She pressed a shaking hand to her sternum, feeling her ribcage rise and fall in shallow bursts. The faint vibration was still there, subtle but constant, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. "They're still inside me." She clutched at her chest, her nails biting into her skin, as though she could dig them out by force. A whisper tickled the edge of her mind. "You felt it once. You don't remember opening it, but you did, long ago." Her throat tightened as she tried to recall that night. The fire, the screams, but every memory frayed like old film left too long in the sun. She remembered her parents shouting, the smoke curling under her bedroom door, the faint sound of knocking, always knocking, and then nothing. She stumbled backward, her shoulder brushing the soot-stained wall. The surface pulsed faintly beneath her touch, warm and soft like flesh. She recoiled instantly, her stomach heaving. "No," she whispered hoarsely. "You're not real. You're not real." But the walls disagreed. They quivered faintly, as though suppressing laughter. From deep within them came a muffled sound, soft and deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. She pressed her hands harder over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't external anymore. It came from inside her head, resonating in her skull. The bathroom door creaked slightly, shifting inward without being touched. A thin tendril of smoke curled out from the gap and slithered across the floor like a living thing. Her bare feet flinched back instinctively as the tendril approached, but it stopped inches from her toes, coiling lazily. "You're almost ready," a voice whispered from everywhere at once. "Almost open." Her phone buzzed weakly on the floor where she had dropped it earlier. She dove for it with trembling hands, swiping at the cracked screen. A new message glowed faintly. "Kamok, back now. Don't wait." She shook her head violently, tears blurring her vision. "I can't," she whispered. "It's too strong. I'm too." Another message interrupted her. "Do it or be the door forever." Her stomach clenched as bile rose in her throat. She knew what that meant. She could feel them stirring in her chest, now long thin fingers brushing lightly against her lungs, testing the cage of her ribs like prisoners testing bars. Her reflection flickered in the black screen of her phone, and for a heartbeat, she saw something else staring back. Not her face. Not human at all. It smiled. Slowly, patiently, the tendril of smoke thickened, rising higher until it took on the vague shape of a hand. Its fingers extended slowly, impossibly long, stretching toward her chest. She scrambled backward, but the hand followed, curling around her sternum like a gentle caress. The touch burned, ice cold and blistering hot at once. "Don't," she gasped, clutching her shirt. But the hand tightened, squeezing lightly as though testing the strength of her bones. The knocking resumed in her chest, stronger now. 3. Pause. 3. Faster, louder. Her ribs vibrated violently, pain lancing through her body with each strike. "Knock for us," the voice urged sweetly. "Let us out. You're the door now." She pressed the phone to her sternum, her fingers trembling as she reread the words "Kamok back. Seal it." Her fist hovered over her chest, shaking violently. The tendril tightened again, sharp pain radiating through her rib cage.
She screamed as she struck herself. Once, twice, 3 times. Pause, 3 more. The sound was muffled, but it echoed strangely, resonating out like ripples in a pond. The apartment groaned around her, walls and floorboards flexing, as though bracing against some great weight. The tendril retracted suddenly, hissing as it dissolved into smoke. But her chest still ached, and the knocking hadn't stopped. She struck again. 3. Pause. 3. The vibration in her chest faltered, stuttering out of rhythm. The whispering voices turned to shrieks. Stop, you'll close us out again. She ignored them, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face as her fists met her sternum over and over. The air around her erupted in a deafening roar, and the apartment shifted violently. For a moment, she wasn't in her hallway anymore. She stood in her childhood bedroom, the wallpaper peeling, the floor covered in ash. Flames licked at the edges of her vision, but they didn't burn her. Figures moved just beyond the smoke, tall, thin, their glowing ember eyes fixed on her. One stepped closer, its blackened face stretching into a grin too wide for its skull. You're almost shut, it hissed. But doors don't stay closed forever, not when they're alive. She struck her chest again. 3. Pause. 3. The figures convulsed violently, smoke pouring from their mouths as they stumbled backward into the growing inferno. The knocking inside her ribcage slowed. Once, twice, then nothing.
The silence that followed was too complete to feel safe. She knelt trembling on the scorched floor, her fists pressed hard against her chest. The knocking had stopped. The vibrations were gone. For the first time in what felt like days, her ribcage felt still empty. She dared a shallow breath and almost wept at the simple act of air filling her lungs without resistance. But something about the quiet felt wrong. It wasn't the peaceful aftermath of victory. It was the unnatural hush of a forest, moments before a predator lunges. Slowly, she raised her head, eyes darting around the warped remains of her childhood bedroom. The wallpaper still curled in charred strips, and soot-blackened toys littered the floor where they'd been left decades ago. The door stood ajar. Beyond it, shadows shifted lazily like smoke, and faint ember glows blinked in and out of view. She knew those eyes by now. They were waiting, watching. Their whispers had stopped, but she could feel their presence pressing against her skin, a weight heavier than any silence should carry. Her hands dropped from her chest to the floor, and she dug her fingers into the ash-streaked wood, as if to anchor herself. "I closed you out," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "You're not in me anymore." But even as she said it, a faint shiver coiled through her bones like distant footsteps. The figures beyond the door seemed to sense her doubt. One of them leaned slightly forward, its ember eyes flaring faintly in the smoky dark. Though its mouth didn't move, a voice slithered into her mind, smooth as oil. "You closed nothing, you only delayed. Doors breathe, just like you, and breath always leads back to an opening." Her stomach clenched violently as the air grew thick and humid, curling with that sickly sweetness of smoldering wood. The wallpaper began to ripple faintly like water disturbed by a slow current. She staggered to her feet, her legs weak and trembling. Her reflection caught her eye in the cracked vanity mirror across the room. At first it seemed normal, her pale face, wide eyes, soot-streaked skin. But then it smiled. Not a flicker, not a shadow, a deliberate, slow stretch of lips that wasn't hers. Her chest tightened painfully. She stepped back, her heel knocking into the bed frame. "No," she said hoarsely, "you're gone. I sent you back. The reflection only tilted its head, ember flecks pulsing faintly in its eyes. You sent nothing back. We came home. The bedroom door creaked wider, and heat surged through the gap like a furnace roaring to life. The air shimmered, walls twisting, as if the house itself inhaled deeply. A faint sound started then, not knocking this time, but scratching. Long, deliberate drags of nails against wood. The sound moved up the hallway toward her door, slow and unhurried. She pressed her back to the vanity, her hands groping for anything, something to fight, to defend, to block. But her fingers found only ashes and splintered wood. The scratching paused just beyond the doorway. She held her breath, every muscle in her body tense enough to snap. Then came a whisper, low and rich with hunger. Knock for us again, or we'll crawl through your cracks. She pressed her palms hard to her ears, as if it would silence them. No, she whispered, though the word felt fragile, meaningless. Her sternum gave a faint ache, just enough to make her flinch. She staggered forward, away from the vanity, her feet crunching on soot and debris. The scratching resumed, but faster now, more frantic, as though the unseen thing was clawing at the wood itself. Ember eyes blinked in the hallway shadows, multiplying until they seemed to line the walls like distant stars. The air vibrated faintly, carrying a sound almost like breathing, but louder, wetter, impossibly close. Her stomach turned violently, as she realized it wasn't coming from outside anymore. It came from within her chest. She doubled over, clutching her shirt. They're still in there. She fell to her knees, nails digging into her palms until blood welled beneath them. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket. She fumbled it out with shaking hands, smearing ash and sweat across the cracked screen. One message blinked faintly. Come knock back, now before they root. Her throat tightened. Root? What did that mean? A second message appeared almost instantly. Do it or they'll use you to open the world. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had no choice. Slowly she raised her fist, her knuckles brushing her sternum. The whispering around her rose sharply, dozens of voices overlapping in a frenzied chorus. Don't knock, open. Let us through. She shut her eyes tight, tears burning hot trails down her cheeks. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 more. The sound reverberated like a hammer on steel, shaking the room violently. The ember eyes in the hallway flared wildly, and the scratching turned into pounding fists, slamming the doorframe. The heat surged so intensely she thought her skin might blister. She struck again. 3. Pause. 3. The whispers broke into shrieks of rage and pain, overlapping until her head felt ready to split. The house shook violently now, cracks spiderwebbing across the walls. A sound like a massive door slamming echoed through her skull. Her chest gave one final violent shudder, then fell blessedly silent. No knocking, no scratching. Nothing. For a moment, she allowed herself a trembling breath. Maybe it was over. Maybe she was free. But the ember eyes in the hallway didn't disappear. They blinked slowly, watching her, waiting. The ember eyes didn't move. They hovered in the darkness beyond the bedroom door, blinking in slow unison, like creatures patiently biding their time. She stayed frozen on the floor, chest heaving as her knuckles throbbed from striking herself. The knocking inside her had stopped, but she could still feel faint warmth under her ribs, a lingering presence, like an ember smoldering deep in the ashes of a long-dead fire. The house groaned softly around her, wood shifting and sighing as though stretching after a long slumber. She swallowed hard, her throat raw and dry. "You can't come through," she whispered hoarsely, clutching her chest with both hands. "I'm not your door anymore." The ember eyes blinked in perfect rhythm. 3. Pause. 3. The air shifted, carrying their low, overlapping whispers. "You're still open. A door doesn't close. It forgets it's open." The words coiled around her mind, heavy and cloying like smoke. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled too violently to hold her. The heat in the hallway flared again, rolling across her skin in waves. The doorframe to her bedroom began to blacken, charred splinters curling away like peeling bark. The figures in the shadows leaned forward, impossibly tall and thin, their ember eyes glowing brighter now. "Let us root," one voice hissed, deeper than the others. "Stop fighting. Roots hold better than doors." She shook her head violently, clutching her hair as though she could tear their voices out of her mind. "No," she croaked, but the word felt brittle, almost laughable in the heavy silence that followed. Then, all at once, the knocking started again, not from her chest, not from the hallway, but from every surface around her. The walls, the floor, even the cracked vanity mirror. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 more. The sound surrounded her, syncing with the pounding of her pulse, until she couldn't tell where the echoes ended and her body began. Her phone buzzed violently in her pocket, a sharp vibration that made her flinch. She fumbled it out with shaking hands. The screen glowed faintly, displaying one final message: "Seal them or become their root. Knock back. Do not stop." Her heart twisted violently as she stared at the words. This wasn't just about closing them out anymore. It was about keeping them from spreading, using her as a conduit to claw into the world beyond. The ember eyes advanced, moving closer in slow, deliberate steps. Shadows stretched long and thin across the floor, curling like fingers toward her bare feet. Her fists rose again, trembling violently as she pressed them to her chest. The voices screamed now, shrill and furious. "We waited. We were patient. We deserve the opening." Her knuckles struck her sternum. Once, twice, 3 times. Pause. 3 more. The sound was louder this time, deeper, reverberating through the house with bone-shaking force. The walls convulsed, cracks tearing across the wallpaper as chunks of plaster rained down. The ember eyes flared wildly, some flickering out like dying coals. The shadows shrieked in chorus, their voices overlapping in a storm of rage and desperation. She struck again. 3. Pause. 3. The vibration spread outward, a deep resonance that seemed to reach far beyond the house itself. The figures in the hallway recoiled violently, their long limbs twisting and snapping in unnatural angles as smoke poured from their mouths and eye sockets. "No," they howled, their voices breaking into static and echoes. "Don't seal us. We are the breath between walls. We are the echo." But she didn't stop. Her fists met her sternum in a steady rhythm now, each strike louder than the last. The air grew colder with every knock, the oppressive heat replaced by a biting chill that made her breath fog in front of her. The ember eyes blinked faster, erratic now, as though panicked. The house groaned violently, walls and ceiling warping inward like lungs collapsing. Dust and ash billowed into the air, obscuring her vision. The knocking outside her chest slowed, growing weaker with each strike she made. One final knock. 3. Pause. 3. And then silence. Utter, complete silence. The ember eyes blinked once more, faint as candlelight, before extinguishing entirely. She slumped forward, her forehead pressing to the floor,
as her fists fell limply to her sides. The chill lingered, but the weight pressing against her chest was gone. No whispers, no scratching, no knocking. She was alone, but deep in her mind, faint and almost playful, came a final whisper. Doors don't stay shut forever, and neither do you.
If you've made it this far, you already know. Some doors never truly stay shut. The echoes, the whispers, the faint knocks in the night. Maybe they're not just memories after all. What if your childhood home isn't the only place they're waiting? If this story sent a chill down your spine, don't stop here. Subscribe and join us for more haunting journeys into the unknown, where history, mystery, and horror intertwine. There's always another door to open and another secret waiting behind it. So stay curious and stay cautious.